It was the third week of November 2009, and the small lakeside town of Ash Hollow, Minnesota, had already disappeared beneath its first serious snowstorm of the season. The kind that softens every sound and makes the woods feel ancient, like the world is holding its breath. 32-year-old Elena Marris, a botanical illustrator from Duluth, had rented a rustic cabin on the northern edge of Iron Ridge Forest for what she called a 5-day creative retreat. She told her younger sister Claire that it would be 5 days of sketching, silence, and 0 distractions. The cabin sat half a mile off County Road 88, accessible only by a winding gravel trail that vanished into birch and pine. It belonged to a retired surgeon named Dr. Martin Vess, who rented it seasonally through a handwritten flyer at the Ash Hollow General Store. No website, no deposit, just cash and a signed waiver acknowledging there'd be no cell service. Limited plumbing, and that emergency response could take up to 30 minutes in bad weather. Elena arrived on a gray Tuesday afternoon. Her last confirmed stop was at a place called Bergen's Feed and Fuel, a small-town hybrid of gas station and bait shop 3 miles south of the cabin. Security footage showed her buying a bundle of firewood, 2 gallons of kerosene, a bag of apples, and a paperback novel. She wore a charcoal gray coat, her knit cap stitched with a small embroidered red robin. The cashier, Darlene Kopp, remembered her perfectly, said she was cheerful, polite, and looking forward to the quiet. That footage, time-stamped 3:46 p.m., November 17th, would become one of the most replayed clips in Minnesota cold case history. Dr. Vess expected Elena to drop the cabin key off by Sunday morning. When she didn't, he assumed the weather had delayed her. Heavy snow had blanketed the region, and the narrow gravel road leading in was nearly impassable. He waited until Monday, then drove his pickup as far as the terrain allowed and hiked the last quarter-mile through knee-deep snow. When he reached the cabin just after noon, he noticed something odd. No smoke from the chimney. No sound but the wind threading through trees. The door was locked from the inside. He called out her name. Nothing. Using his spare key, he stepped inside. The air was freezing. The wood stove was cold, but nothing appeared disturbed. A half-finished charcoal sketch of winterberry branches lay open on the small wooden table by the window. Her suitcase sat neatly unpacked on the bed, clothes folded. A mug of tea, long cold, rested near the stove. Her boots stood by the door, and her coat hung from a peg beside them, but Elena was gone. Dr. Vess stepped outside and scanned the clearing. The world was pure white. Fresh snow had erased every trace of movement. No footprints, no tire tracks, nothing leading toward the road or the woods. Just stillness. He drove straight to the St. Louis County Sheriff's Office and filed a missing person report that afternoon. By dusk, deputies, state troopers, and volunteers from Ash Hollow's fire department were combing the forest. Helicopters swept the frozen riverbanks of Iron Lake. Divers checked its edges despite the ice beginning to form. For 9 days they searched through snow and silence and found nothing. Not a glove, not a scarf, not a trace she'd ever left that cabin alive. Elena's sister, Claire, flew in from Philadelphia and spoke at a press conference inside the county courthouse. Behind her stood a blown-up photo of Elena, smiling, charcoal dust on her hands, surrounded by wildflowers she'd drawn from life. Claire's voice trembled as she described her sister as the kindest soul I know, someone who still sent handwritten birthday cards and remembered every plant's Latin name. Her parents, both retired teachers from Rochester, offered a $15,000 reward. Tips came in, none that held. One hunter said he saw a woman near Route 61 the morning after she vanished, but his timeline didn't fit. A psychic called from St. Paul with coordinates that led to an empty deer blind. By early December, the search was suspended. The snow kept falling. The forest swallowed its secrets. And Elena Marris was officially added to the Minnesota Missing Persons database. For almost 10 years, her name gathered dust in archived case files until February 2019. That winter, 2 brothers, Lucas and Jeremy Thorne, were snowmobiling through state forest land near the northern edge of Iron Ridge Reserve, about 12 miles from where Elena's cabin once stood. The sky was flat gray, the air sharp with cold. Lucas spotted something half buried in the snow, the edge of worn canvas poking through the ice. They stopped, brushed it free, and uncovered a weathered messenger bag, its leather strap cracked from years of exposure. Inside, a waterlogged sketchbook, a tin of charcoal pencils, and a laminated library card bearing one name, Elena Marris. The brothers knew the name instantly. Their mother had volunteered in the original 2009 search. They marked the GPS coordinates and drove straight to the ranger station at Birch Run Visitor Center. Within hours, the St. Louis County Sheriff's Office reopened the case. Detective Warren Kellen, who'd been a rookie deputy during the first investigation, was assigned lead. He remembered it vividly, not just because of how strange it was, but because of how wrong it had felt back then. No struggle, no exit trail, just absence, carved into winter. When the bag was processed at the lab, 3 sketchbook pages were still legible. The first, a delicate pencil drawing of winterberry branches, almost identical to the unfinished sketch left on the cabin table. The second, dated November 19, 2009, with a handwritten note scrawled in the margin, "Someone knocked last night." Didn't answer. Stood outside for a long time. The third page contained only 5 hurried words. "He knows I'm alone here." The discovery didn't just reopen a case file. It reopened a wound. For the families who had walked those woods for weeks in the freezing dark, this was proof she had been there all along, somewhere beyond the reach of their flashlights, beyond the perimeter of their maps. And for Detective Kellen, it was more than a mystery reignited. It was a reckoning 10 years overdue. Detective Warren Kellen sat alone in the evidence room of the St. Louis County Sheriff's Office, the messenger bag laid open under fluorescent light. The leather was stiff and cracked, its smell faintly of mildew and something older, like the forest itself. 3 cardboard boxes sat beside him, pulled from archives, each labeled with her name in fading ink, Marris Elena, missing person, 2009. He flipped through the old file, photographs of the cabin interior, search maps folded and refolded until the creases tore, witness transcripts typed on yellowing paper. The initial search had been fast and massive, over 60 volunteers, state police, K-9 units from Duluth and Grand Rapids. They'd covered nearly 5 square miles of frozen wilderness. The report from the search coordinator, a retired Marine named Gerald Foss, still unnerved him even now. Foss had written, "The total absence of trace evidence is statistically improbable. Either she was removed from the area by vehicle, or she never left the cabin on her own." Kellen underlined that line again, the ink fresh and dark. He leaned, back in his chair, the old fluorescent light buzzing faintly overhead. 10 years, 10 years of silence, and now the forest had spoken again. The forensic analysis of the messenger bag came back 3 days later. Soil samples embedded in the strap matched the clay-rich banks of Coldwater River, nearly 4 miles north of where Eleanor had been staying. Microscopic fibers were also recovered. Synthetic, dark blue, possibly from a jacket or tarp. But under ultraviolet light, the lab techs found something else. 3 tiny specks on the bag's interior lining, blood. DNA confirmed it belonged to Elena Marris. Warren called for a full re-examination of the entire region north of Iron Ridge. This time, he wouldn't rely on assumptions about how far someone might wander in snow. This time, they would follow the evidence backward, from where the forest had given her back. He assembled a small team, 2 deputies, a forensic anthropologist from the University of Minnesota named Dr. Lillian Shaw, and a cadaver dog unit. They set up base near the discovery site, a dense tangle of hemlock and cedar that swallowed light even at noon. On the second morning, the dog, a German shepherd named Rue, alerted near a collapsed section of the riverbank about 60 yards from where the bag had been found. The ground there was unstable, waterlogged from years of spring flooding. They began a slow, methodical dig, layer by layer, the air heavy with the smell of wet earth and thawing pine. By mid-afternoon, a deputy brushed soil from a fragment of fabric, gray wool. Shaw examined it closely. It matched the coat description from 2009, gray, mid-length, 3 buttons down the front. Then, under the fading light of the second day, they found bone. 2 small fragments, pale and fragile, the size of a wrist. Human radius and ulna, later confirmed by dental and mitochondrial DNA testing. The remains were Elena's. There was no longer any doubt. That night, as snow began to fall again, Warren stood at the edge of the excavation site. The skeletal trees creaked in the wind, their branches bending like they were bowing to something unseen. 10 years of uncertainty had ended, but the real work had just begun. He stared at the rusted folding knife they'd recovered 3 feet from the bones. The handle cracked, the blade rusted but intact. It was a Timber Ridge lockback knife, a common brand, sold across the Midwest. And on its hinge, forensic techs found traces of blood, Elena's. Within 48 hours, Warren's office became a command center again. Evidence boards filled the walls, maps, photographs, arrows drawn in red string. He started with the same question Foss had written in his report a decade ago. If she didn't leave the cabin, who took her from it? He began retracing every person connected to Elena's final days. First was Dr. Martin Vess, now 73, retired, living with his second wife on the outskirts of Two Harbors. Warren showed up unannounced on a gray Thursday morning. Vess invited him inside, surprised but courteous. They sat in a sunroom, filled with plants that looked carefully maintained, the kind of greenery that needs constant tending. Warren walked him through November 2009 again. Vess's story hadn't changed. He'd been in Duluth that week, attending a surgical conference. Hotel records confirmed it then, and they still did now. He'd spoken with Elena once by phone to confirm the key drop-off, and that was all. When Warren asked if anyone else might have known she'd be staying alone, Vess hesitated. He admitted he might have mentioned it at the general store when he posted the rental listing, maybe even joked about it over coffee with locals. "Small towns talk," he said, sighing. "They always have." Then Warren asked the question he already knew the answer to. "Did you own a Timber Ridge lockback knife?" Vess smiled faintly. "No. I prefer fixed blades." He opened a drawer and produced an old hunting knife in a worn leather sheath. Not the same make, not even close. Warren thanked him and left, but something about the conversation unsettled him. Not guilt, not deceit. Just that word, talk. In small towns, people didn't need the internet to know everything. The next name on his list was Darlene Kopp, the cashier from Bergen's Feed and Fuel. 10 years older now, but still working the same shift. She remembered Elena immediately. "Sweet girl," she said. "Kind eyes. You don't forget people like that." Warren asked if anyone else had been in the store that day, someone who might have overheard her mention where she was headed. Darlene thought for a moment. "Yeah. There was one of the regulars, Travis Lorne. He was stacking the firewood by the counter, helping out for a few bucks." She paused. "He lived out near Pine River Bend, close to where that cabin is. Kept to himself, smoked those cheap hand-rolled cigarettes. You'd smell them before you saw him." Warren wrote the name down. That night, he ran the background check. Travis Allen Lorne, age 46. No violent record, just trespassing citations, unpaid fines, and one minor assault charge from a bar fight years earlier. Nothing that screamed danger. But he'd lived within walking distance of Elena's cabin at the time she disappeared. By morning, Warren was sitting in his office surrounded by maps, connecting lines between her last known location, the river, and Lorne's old property, barely 2 miles apart. It was close enough to walk in 30 minutes through the woods. He picked up his phone and started making calls. The property management company that had owned Lorne's rental said he'd left without notice in 2014. Owed back rent. Owned a brown Ford pickup, possibly non-functional, and a snowmobile he used more often than his truck. He'd since drifted. Traverse City, then a boarding house, then seasonal dock work up near Grand Marais. Never stayed anywhere long, Every trace of him led north, closer to the deep woods that bordered Iron Ridge. As Warren studied the map under his lamp's glow, the shadows of trees on the paper almost looked like veins, spreading outward, feeding something unseen. Somewhere out there, he thought, was the man who'd walked those same paths on a frozen night 10 years ago. And the forest, once again, was waiting to talk. 2 days later, the early spring snow came again. Thin, dry flakes drifting over Iron Ridge like static. Detective Warren Kellen drove north before sunrise, the road empty, his headlights carving through the mist. He'd received a lead from the marina in Silver Bay, a man matching Travis. Lorne's description had been seen working seasonal maintenance jobs there until just a few weeks earlier. According to the marina manager, Travis had a small camper parked deep in the state forest, moving it every few months to avoid ranger patrols. He was the kind of man who lived on the edge of maps, quiet, transient, forgotten. By the time Warren reached the site, daylight had broken through the fog. A rusted Winnebago sat tilted on uneven ground, surrounded by stacked firewood, a blue tarp, and a ring of smoke from a still warm fire. He parked 100 feet back, unholstered his flashlight, and approached with 2 deputies. They knocked on the camper door. No answer. Warren knocked again, louder. "Mr. Lorne, it's Detective Kellen with the St. Louis County Sheriff's Office. We just want to talk." A long silence followed. Then the door creaked open. Travis Lorne stood barefoot in the frame, his hair gray at the edges, a beard like frost shadowing his jaw. He wore thermal underwear and that same blue canvas jacket the postal clerk had described. His voice was low, rough with sleep. "I've been waiting for this." Warren's pulse quickened. "For what?" "For someone to come ask about her." The interrogation room back in Ash Hollow was silent, except for the soft hum of the recording device. Travis sat hunched forward, hands clasped, staring at the table. He'd waived his right to an attorney, something that always made Warren uneasy. "Where were you the week of November 19th, 2009? Travis rubbed his palms together. "I don't remember dates. I was living near Pine River Bend then, clearing snow for folks. I used to walk the woods at night when I couldn't sleep." "Helps me think." Warren slid a photograph across the table. Grainy security footage from Bergen's Feed and Fuel. Elena at the counter. Travis 6 feet behind her near the firewood display. "You were there," Warren said. Travis nodded. "Yeah, I was stacking wood for Darlene that day. $20 and a cup of coffee. You didn't talk to her?" "No. You sure about that?" Travis lifted his eyes. They were pale blue, sharp despite the years. "Detective, that store gets busy." "I wasn't paying attention." Warren leaned closer. "You lived 2 miles from her cabin. You smoked roll-your-own cigarettes. Deputies found the same kind of butts near her back porch. And you walked those woods at night. You expect me to believe you never saw her again?" Travis was quiet for several seconds. Then, "I saw her, twice." The room fell still. "The first night I was just walking the ridge trail," he said. "Saw lights in the cabin. Usually that place was dark." I stopped. Looked for a while. She was inside, drawing or something. Didn't go near, just watched. Then I left. Warren's jaw tightened. "And the second time?" "The next night. I went back. She came out on the porch to smoke. Snow was falling. Light from the lamp made her look." He stopped, searching for words. "Peaceful." He stared at the table again. "After a while, she went back in and locked the door. I heard the bolt. I stayed outside maybe 20 minutes. Then I left." Warren's voice dropped. "That's not walking, Mr. Lorne, that's stalking." Travis shook his head slowly. "I wasn't there to hurt her. I just liked the quiet near the river. But I wasn't alone out there." Warren frowned. "What do you mean?" "I heard someone else that night. East of the cabin, crunching through snow. Not an animal. Footsteps, slow, deliberate. I saw a light for a second, maybe a headlamp. Then it went dark." Warren's heart thudded once, hard. "Did you see their face?" "No, too far. But they were watching her too." He leaned back, eyes distant. "After she went missing, I thought about telling someone. But I knew how it'd look. A guy like me, no job, no money, saying he'd been outside her cabin. I was scared. The air between them hung heavy. "Did you own a Timber Ridge folding knife?" Warren asked. "Yeah, Bought one at a hardware store in Duluth back in 2008. Lost it a year or two later. Probably out in those woods somewhere. Warren closed his notebook slowly. You realize that knife was found beside her remains? Travis didn't blink. Then I guess it didn't stay lost. After 3 hours of questioning, Warren stepped out of the interview room. Through the glass, he watched Travis sit motionless. Shoulders bowed as if the years had finally caught up with him. The prosecutor refused to file charges. No physical evidence linking him directly, only circumstantial details and proximity. Warren went back in, told Travis he was free to leave but should stay nearby. As Travis reached the door, he turned. "Detective," he said softly. "Whoever that other man was, he stayed when I left." Then he walked out into the rain. Warren didn't sleep that night. He sat in his office, surrounded by files, replaying Travis's words. Someone else was out there. He opened the old volunteer logs from the original 2009 search. Dozens of names, handwritten, smudged by weather and time. Then one detail caught his eye. A ranger named Carl Houston, listed as search lead for the southern grid near the cabin. Warren flipped through personnel records. Houston had worked for the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources since 1998. He'd logged more hours in those woods than anyone alive. He'd also taken 2 weeks personal leave starting November 20th, 2009, just 3 days after Elena disappeared. Reason given: family emergency. No documentation. Warren stared at the file. The timing was too neat. He picked up his keys, the office light still burning behind him, and drove south through falling snow. By the time he reached Briar Falls, the sky had turned the color of slate. Carl Houston's house sat at the end of a narrow road, a small bungalow surrounded by birch trees and silence. When he answered the door, Warren saw a man in his 60s, solidly built, his beard neat, his eyes the color of winter lakes, clear, unreadable. "Detective Kellen," he said, recognizing him instantly. "Come in. I wondered how long it would take." The warmth of Carl Houston's home felt almost deliberate. A small fire glowing behind glass, coffee brewing on the stove, the kind of domestic comfort that made it easy to forget what had brought Detective Warren Kellen there. Carl was polite, steady, the embodiment of an old ranger who'd spent a lifetime mapping the woods. Framed photographs of forest trails hung on the walls, their captions labeled in neat handwriting. Iron Ridge, 2003. Boundary Creek, 2006. They sat across from each other at a small kitchen table. Warren set his notebook down and began. "You were part of the original search in November 2009. Carl nodded. "That's right. I covered the southern quadrant near the river. Hardest terrain we had. I remember it well." "And you took personal leave right after the search started?" Carl hesitated. "Yes, my mother was sick. Pneumonia. I drove to Ohio to help my sister." "She made it through, thank God." Warren studied his face. Calm, confident, every word measured. "Do you remember ever checking that cabin before Elena Marris arrived?" Carl leaned back in his chair. "I patrolled the area every couple weeks. That property had a reputation for attracting trespassers. Hunters, mostly. I made sure it stayed locked up. That's all." Warren flipped through his notes. "Do you carry a Timber Ridge folding knife?" Carl stood, walked to a drawer, and pulled one out. "Sure do. Standard issue gear for most rangers. Durable, easy to sharpen." Warren's gaze settled on the knife. "Same model, same brand. The handle worn smooth from years of use. Have you ever lost one?" Carl shook his head. "Never. I'm careful with my tools." Then, after a pause, "Though I did lend this one out once. During the 2009 search, one of the volunteers forgot his. Said he'd return it after the shift. Never saw it again. Do you remember who that was?" Carl frowned, trying to recall. Tall guy, maybe mid-30s. Dark hair, quiet. Signed in late that day. Think his name was Owen. Owen Barris? Or Barr, something like that. Warren's pen froze over the page. "Barris?" he repeated. "Could it have been Owen Barrage?" Carl nodded slowly. "That sounds right." Back at the sheriff's office, Warren dug through the 2009 volunteer sign-in sheets, pages faded and rain-spotted. There it was, third from the bottom. Owen Barrage, age 34, address listed as Honor Township. No phone number. Warren ran the name through the state database. Sparse history: seasonal laborer, hardware store clerk, dishwasher, Christmas tree farm worker. No criminal record, no property ownership. A man who drifted from job to job, leaving nothing behind. But there was one document, a restraining order filed in 2011 by a woman named Natalie Crest. Also from Honor. Warren requested the court records. The language was brief but unmistakable. Harassment, unwanted visits, repeated phone calls, entering her residence without consent. The order had been granted for 1 year. Warren tracked Natalie down in Manistee, where she now worked as a dental hygienist. She agreed to meet at a small cafe overlooking the harbor. She arrived early, nervous, her hands trembling slightly as she stirred her coffee. "I haven't heard that name in years," she said quietly, when Warren mentioned Owen Barrage. He was unsettling. At first, he seemed harmless, quiet, polite. Then he started showing up at my apartment late at night, saying he just wanted to check I was safe. He'd leave notes on my car, little gifts. Always small, always strange. Feathers, polished stones, drawings of trees. "Did he ever hurt you?" Warren asked. "No, not physically. But there was something in his eyes, a kind of ownership. Like he believed we were connected. He told me once that real loyalty meant never letting go of someone, even if they wanted you to." She looked up, her expression haunted. "He said if he ever truly cared about someone, he'd never let them disappear from his life. Ever." Warren's throat went dry. He asked when she'd last seen him. The restraining order expired in 2012. After that, nothing. "He just vanished." "Moved away, I guess." Warren thanked her and stepped outside into the gray drizzle, heart pounding. The pieces were starting to align. The knife, the ranger, the drifter. Over the next 48 hours, Warren built a file on Owen Barrage from every trace left behind. In 2011, he'd worked briefly at a lumber mill in Buckley, then disappeared from payroll. A landlord from Casca Township remembered him as quiet but strange, evicted after 6 months for disturbing other tenants. Complaints ranged from noises at odd hours to objects being moved from neighboring porches. After 2013, he vanished completely. No tax records, no mailing address, no job history. It was as though he'd stepped off the grid. Then Warren cross-referenced hunting license databases. There it was. Barrage, Owen J., age 44. Small game license renewed in October 2018. Mailing address, general delivery. Interlaken Post Office, the same location linked to Travis Lorne months earlier. He drove there the next morning. The postmaster, an old man named Ed Kloss, recognized the name instantly. "Yeah, I remember him. Came by every few weeks. Didn't talk much. Always paid cash. Gave me the creeps, to be honest. Stopped showing up last March. Still got some of his mail in the back." Kloss returned with 2 envelopes, a DNR renewal notice and an overdue campground fee for a primitive lot near Interlaken State Park. Lot number 14. Warren drove there immediately. The road narrowed into dirt, then into rutted tire tracks leading to a clearing surrounded by jack pine. The air was still, the forest silent except for the sound of wind moving through dry needles. At first glance, the campsite looked abandoned. A ring of stones from an old fire pit, gray ash compacted in the center. A torn scrap of blue tarp fluttered from a branch. Then, as Warren scanned the area, something caught his eye, a small can of rocks near the edge of the clearing, deliberate and neatly stacked. He crouched, lifted the top stone, and uncovered a mason jar sealed with rust around its lid. Inside were small objects, a button with a red robin emblem, a piece of gray wool fabric, and a folded, yellowed piece of paper. He unscrewed the lid carefully. The paper was a page torn from a sketchbook, a pencil drawing of a winterberry branch, signed in small script at the bottom, E. Marris. Warren stood slowly, breath clouding in the cold air. This wasn't just a campsite. It was a shrine. He radioed for backup. Within hours, the clearing was marked off with tape, flashlights flickering through the trees as forensic teams combed the ground. They found 2 more jars, one holding a cracked wristwatch, another with a lock of brown hair tied with string. Beneath a decaying log at the far edge of the site, wrapped in plastic, was a leather-bound journal. Inside were 10 years of entries written in obsessive, meticulous handwriting. Most were mundane: weather notes, animal tracks, dates of moon phases. But scattered through the pages were paragraphs that froze Warren's blood. She doesn't know I'm here, but that's the point. To see without being seen, and another, weeks later. The ranger lent me his knife. He doesn't know. I won't give it back. Near the final pages, they found the bag. The river talks. I hear her in the water sometimes. When Warren reached that last line, the snow outside had begun to fall again, soft and endless. He looked up at the trees and realized something with quiet horror. The forest hadn't kept a secret all these years. It had kept a promise. The arrest came 3 days later. It was early May, gray skies sagging low over the Iron Ridge forest, when a fire lookout reported thin smoke rising from an unmarked ravine along the Boardman River, a place not listed on any park map. Detective Warren Kellen led the team in on foot. The forest floor was soft under melting snow, the air wet with the smell of cedar and ash. When they reached the clearing, they saw it, a small lean-to built from scavenged lumber and canvas, almost invisible among the trees. Outside, on a tree stump, sat a man. He didn't move as the officers approached. His beard was long and tangled, his clothes ragged, his eyes startlingly clear. When Warren raised his voice and identified himself, the man simply lifted his hands. "I know why you're here," he said quietly. It was Owen Barrage. He didn't resist, didn't run. He stood calmly as they cuffed him, as if the weight of the handcuffs was a formality, something he'd already accepted years ago. On the walk back to the access road, one of the deputies asked him why he hadn't fled when he saw them coming. Barrage's answer chilled everyone within earshot. "Because running only delays the inevitable," he said. "I learned that from her. She ran too." The interview room in St. Louis County headquarters was quiet, except for the faint ticking of a wall clock. Barrage sat at the metal table, a paper cup of water untouched in front of him. Warren watched from across the room, his recorder blinking red. "You know why you're here," Warren began. Barrage nodded slowly. "Elena." His voice was flat, measured, without emotion. Warren laid out a series of photographs: Elena's cabin, her sketchbook pages, the mason jars recovered from the clearing. "These belong to her, and we found them at your campsite." Barrage looked at the photos as if seeing old memories. "I kept them safe," he murmured. "No one else would." Warren leaned forward. "You call that keeping someone safe? You buried her things like trophies." Barrage shook his head, almost sadly. "Not trophies, reminders." There was a pause. Warren pressed the button on his recorder. "Tell me what happened, Owen. From the beginning." He stared at his hands for a long time before speaking. "It was cold that night," he said. "November 19th. The woods were quiet, so quiet you could hear snow landing on branches. I used to walk when I couldn't sleep. That's how I saw her. The cabin lights, the sound of her humming while she worked. She had this stillness about her. I wanted to understand it." He paused, voice distant. "I came back the next night, stayed near the trees. She went out on the porch to smoke. The light from the lamp caught her face. She looked peaceful, like she belonged there. I wasn't planning anything bad. I just wanted to watch for a while." He rubbed his thumb against the table edge, eyes far away. "But she noticed. The next night she was different. Kept the lights dim, curtains half drawn. I think she felt me there. She started packing her bag." Warren felt his stomach knot. Barrage's voice dropped lower. "When she picked up her bag, I panicked. I thought she was leaving. I didn't want her to go, so I knocked." He looked up, meeting Warren's eyes for the first time. "I only wanted to explain that I wasn't dangerous." Warren's tone hardened. "You broke in." "I didn't mean to," Barrage said quickly. "She opened the door just a crack with the chain on. She saw me and she looked terrified, like she knew something I didn't. I told her to wait, that I just wanted to talk. But she tried to shut the door. I pushed. The chain snapped. She fell." He exhaled sharply, trembling for the first time. "She grabbed a knife from the counter. I tried to take it from her. I didn't want to hurt her, but she fought back. The blade cut my hand. It hurt, bad." I panicked. "I hit her, just once." Warren's pen froze. Barrage's eyes unfocused, his voice slipping into monotone. She fell against the table. Hit her head. She was breathing, but there was blood. I didn't know what to do. I thought if she woke up, she'd scream, "Tell the police." Everything would be over. He paused, his next words a whisper. So I carried her outside. The room was silent except for the faint hum of the fluorescent light overhead. The snow was heavy, Barrage said. I walked toward the river. I thought the cold air would wake her up, but she was quiet. I laid her down near the water. I checked for a pulse. She was still alive. Barely. She looked at me. Didn't say anything. Just looked. He swallowed hard. I had the ranger's knife in my coat pocket. I thought about using it. I opened it, but I couldn't. I just sat there with it in my hand until she stopped breathing. He rubbed his forehead, eyes glistening with something that wasn't quite tears. I didn't kill her with the knife. I killed her by taking her outside. The cold did the rest. Warren forced himself to stay steady. Why didn't you call for help? Barrage laughed softly at a hollow sound. What would I have said? That I broke into her cabin because I didn't want to lose a stranger? He looked up again, and this time there was something raw in his eyes. I told myself I'd make it right. That if I buried her gently, kept her things close, remembered her every day, maybe it would mean something. Is that why you joined the search? Warren asked quietly. Barrage nodded. I wanted to be close. I wanted to see what they'd find. And maybe, part of me hoped they wouldn't. When Carl, the ranger, asked for a knife during the search, I realized I still had his. I couldn't give it back. It had my blood on it from the cut she gave me. So I told him I lost it, he sighed. Months later, I buried it near the river. Same place I left her. When the confession ended, the room felt smaller, colder. The forensic team later confirmed every word. Barrage's blood mixed with Elena's on the recovered knife. The soil patterns around her burial site matched his description exactly. The fibers from her messenger bag were traced to a blue tarp found among his belongings. Warren sat outside the interrogation room afterward, staring through the glass. Barrage was motionless, expression blank, as if he'd simply emptied himself of a decade's worth of ghosts. Deputies whispered in the hallway, their voices low. No one could quite look at each other. The woods had kept her secret for 10 years. Now they'd finally told it, one whispered confession at a time. The courtroom was silent when the verdict came. It was a cold November morning again, 10 years to the week since Elena Marris had vanished into the snow. Outside, flakes drifted past the windows of the St. Louis County Courthouse, the same soft kind of snow that had once erased her footprints. Owen Barrage sat at the defense table, hands folded, face blank. When the judge read the sentence, 40 years to life, eligible for parole only after 35, he didn't flinch. Detective Warren Kellen sat 2 rows back, watching. He'd attended dozens of sentencings in his career, but none felt quite like this one. There was no victory here, no triumph. Just a quiet settling of accounts between time, truth, and the human need for closure. The prosecutor's voice echoed off the courtroom walls as she read from her statement. Justice is not about vengeance. It is about restoring what can still be restored. Truth, memory, and peace. When it was over, the bailiff led Barrage out through the side door. He glanced once over his shoulder, not toward Warren, not toward the jury, but toward the back of the room, where Claire Marris, Elena's sister, sat holding a folded photograph. Her eyes didn't move from him. That afternoon, Warren found Claire standing outside the courthouse. The wind had picked up, swirling flakes around her coat. She looked different now, older, sharper. The weight of a decade of grief etched into her face. He didn't even apologize, she said quietly. Warren nodded. Some people can't. Not because they don't feel guilt, because they can't face it. She turned toward him, her expression a mix of exhaustion and clarity. When they found the knife, I thought I'd feel something like relief. But it's strange. All I feel is empty, like the world kept moving while I stayed stuck. Warren looked out at the snow-covered street. Closure isn't a finish line, Claire. It's just a place to rest for a while. She studied him for a long moment, then handed him a small envelope. We're holding a vigil for her this weekend, by the river. I think she'd want you there." He accepted it without a word. 2 nights later, Warren drove out to Coldwater River again. The same dirt road, the same hollow quiet between the trees. Only this time, there were lights, lanterns hanging from branches, candles flickering in the snow. Dozens of people had gathered. Family, old friends, search volunteers who hadn't seen one another in years. Someone played a soft hymn on a guitar, the notes carrying faintly through the cold air. Claire stood near the riverbank, reading a short letter she'd written for her sister. Her voice trembled, but she never stopped. "When they told me you were gone, I kept your sketchbook by my bed," she said. "Every page felt like a conversation I wasn't ready to end. I used to think if I kept reading them, maybe you'd draw one more line somewhere out there. Maybe you'd finish the picture." She paused, breathing through the cold. "Now I know you already did. You finished it that night, and we just had to find the rest." When she folded the paper, no one spoke for a long time. The river moved beneath a thin skin of ice, whispering against the shore. Warren felt something shift in his chest, a kind of quiet release he couldn't name. For 10 years, the case had been a weight he carried every winter. Every snowfall reminded him of what they hadn't found, but now the silence of the woods didn't feel accusing anymore. It felt peaceful. He looked down at the small candle in his hand, the flame bending in the wind. "Rest easy, Elena," he whispered. Later that night, Warren stood alone at the excavation site where her remains had been found. The snow had covered it again, erasing the markers, the flags, the ropes. Only the wind remained, brushing through the trees like a sigh. He closed his eyes and listened, to the creak of branches, to the frozen hush of the river beyond. He thought about the 3 men whose lives had brushed against Elena's. Vess, who rented the cabin. Lorne, who watched from a distance but walked away. And Barrage, who couldn't. Each of them drawn to her in some way. Curiosity, loneliness, obsession. And then he thought about Carl Houston, the ranger who'd unknowingly handed Barrage the knife that night. A tool that would become part of a decade-long mystery. So many threads, all crossing through one quiet woman who'd wanted nothing more than a week of solitude and art. Warren wondered how many other stories the forest still held, half-told, waiting for someone to listen. Weeks later, Warren returned to his office one last time before closing the case file. He stared at the evidence board, the photos, the maps, the red string now faded to pink. He reached up, unpinned the final photo. Elena sitting at the cabin table, smiling, pencil in hand. A still image of calm that had somehow survived the violence that followed. He slid it into the folder marked, Marris, Elena, closed. Before he turned off the light, he paused, looking at the bare corkboard. The silence of the room felt vast and almost sacred. For the first time, he didn't feel haunted by the empty spaces. He felt grateful for them. 3 weeks later, a letter arrived at the sheriff's office addressed to him in careful handwriting. No return name, only a postmark from Grand Marais. Inside was a folded page torn from a sketchbook. On it, a simple pencil drawing, a river in winter, moonlight reflecting off the ice, a single candle burning on the shore. At the bottom, someone had written, "For those who listen, even when it's quiet." Warren smiled faintly. He didn't need to know who sent it. Some stories didn't end. They simply settled into silence, waiting for someone else to remember. By early winter, Iron Ridge was buried in snow again. The roads turned to white corridors between trees, and the river froze solid enough to carry sound for miles. In town, people still talked about Elena Marris. Not in whispers now, but with a kind of quiet reverence. Her story had become part of the landscape. Something folded into the way the wind moved through the pines, at Bergen's Feed and Fuel. A new cashier had hung a small framed copy of one of Elena's sketches behind the counter, the same Robin drawing found inside the mason jar. Customers nodded to it when they paid, as if acknowledging an unspoken debt. The forest that had once held its secrets now held its memory. Detective Warren Kellen drove through those back roads every few weeks, though he had no reason to. Officially, the case was done, But there were habits you didn't break easily. He'd stop near the old cabin site sometimes, park beneath the frozen birch trees and just sit there, engine off. The only sound, his own breathing. The cabin was gone now, torn down by order of the county to prevent trespassing. Only its foundation remained, a rectangle of frost-covered stone surrounded by pale grass. But the silence there didn't feel empty anymore. It felt like a pause between sentences. Sometimes, when the wind was right, he thought he could hear the faint scrape of pencil on paper, the rhythm of someone quietly drawing. He never told anyone that. In March, the sheriff's office received a call from a property developer planning to expand hiking trails through Iron Ridge. They wanted to name one of the new routes after Elena, the Marris path. Warren approved the proposal without hesitation. By summer, a wooden trailhead sign went up near the old Coldwater Bend, engraved with her name. Visitors hiked through those woods without knowing the full story. They saw the beauty, the stillness, the calm. But Warren knew beauty like that was built on memory, on every voice the forest had absorbed. He walked that trail on the first warm evening of June. The light filtered gold through the trees, the smell of pine thick in the air. Halfway along the ridge, he stopped by the riverbank where her vigil candles had burned months earlier. Someone, maybe Claire, maybe a stranger, had left a small bouquet there. Wildflowers, simple, honest. He knelt, touching the edge of one bloom, and whispered, "You're still here." The words disappeared into the wind. But somehow he felt heard. That same night, far north in the Minnesota Correctional Facility, Owen Barrage sat alone in his cell, staring through the small window slit at the falling snow outside. The guards said he hardly spoke anymore. He spent his days sketching trees on napkins, carving birds from scraps of soap, leaving them lined up on his windowsill. The psychologists called it ritualized remorse. One morning during rounds, a guard found a note taped to his wall. It read, "I used to think silence meant peace. Now I know it means distance. And distance is what she deserved, not me. He never signed it. He didn't need to." By autumn, the story of Elena Marris had faded from headlines. Another case, another tragedy had taken its place, as they always do. But in the northern towns of Minnesota, where the winters still whispered through the trees, people remembered her differently. Not as a headline, but as a reminder. Parents told their kids to be careful when hiking alone. Artists left small sketches at trailheads in her honor. A branch, a river, a robin. The town library created an annual scholarship for local students in her name, meant for those who saw beauty in solitude but respected its edge. And every year, when the first snow fell, Claire Marris returned to the river. She'd light a candle, let it drift downstream, and watch until the current carried it out of sight. One evening, as dusk settled over Ash Hollow, Warren found himself sitting on his porch with a cup of black coffee. The world was quiet again, the kind of quiet that feels earned. He opened the sketch that had arrived months earlier, the river under moonlight, a single candle burning on the shore. He'd framed it now, kept it on his living room wall. As he looked at it, something clicked in his mind. Not as a detective, but as a man who'd spent his life chasing the worst in people. He realized that sometimes justice isn't about punishment. It's about understanding, about giving silence a voice and pain a name. He leaned back, listening to the wind move through the bare branches. For the first time in years, it didn't sound like ghosts. It sounded like rest. When winter came again, snow covered Iron Ridge like a blank page. The trail sign bearing Elena's name stood half buried, the letters just visible above the drift. A group of hikers passed by one afternoon, strangers who knew nothing of what had happened there. One of them paused, brushed snow from the sign and whispered, "Pretty name." And then they moved on, their laughter fading down the path, footsteps crunching into the distance. The forest kept listening. The river kept running. And in the quiet spaces between snow and wind, the memory of one woman's voice, the hum of her pencil, the softness of her song lingered, light as breath. Some stories fade when justice is done. Others become part of the place they happened. Iron Ridge will always remember Elena Marris, not for the fear her death caused, but for the light her life left behind. If this story reached you tonight, if it made you stop for a moment and listen to the silence around you. Then maybe that's all she ever wanted, because in the end, the forest remembers everything. We just have to listen long enough to hear it. This has been Missing People Cases. If you'd like more true stories told with truth, memory, and respect, stay with us. There are always more stories waiting in the quiet.